So if we look into it, what we're going to have here is I'm going to bring in a whole array of books. So the books right here are going to look like this. And in those books, we have different kind of objects, right? We always have the same structure. So we always have a title, we always have the author, genre, and the year published. But there will be lots of situations where we don't actually want to have all of the books, but instead we want to have one specific book. So how can we do that? Well, we can go in and say, I have my books array, and I want to find an element within that array with a specific condition. Now in JavaScript, you can't just write the condition in here like maybe you would do in Python, or if you're coming from Python data frames, for example, you will do something where you say, well, the title needs to be The Great Gatsby or something like that. But that's not how we're going to be doing it here. Not exactly. Because what find takes, or what find is that it's a higher order function. So what it takes in is a callback function. It will iterate through the books one by one, and then for each of our elements, it's going to run a function. So I'm just going to, for now, for the first case here, write my function outside just to make it clearer what's happening. If you're still struggling with this, I have another video on the array methods in JavaScript where I go through that in more detail. But here I'm just going to say find Gatsby. And the function is going to take in an object. So I can just say here, it's going to take in a book. And that book, or what I want to have here is that this book dot title needs to be equal to The Great Gatsby, just like that. So this function here will return true or false, and find will now, when I put this in here, find Gatsby, will go one by one through the books. And it's going to say, like for in this case here, okay, I'm going to take the first book. What's the title? The Great Gatsby. I pass that into this function here, compare it, and see, okay, is it true? Is it false? If it's true, the function stops immediately. So with find, you're only going to find one element. In our case here, we'll go through books, and with the first element immediately, we're going to find the book we're looking for. So here I can just say found book equals my books.find, and then with the find Gatsby function, and then I can just console log out the found book. And if we run this whole thing, had an error here. If we run this whole thing, we see we get that book back. Now, we obviously just want to check that it's actually making sense. So I'm going to do this with The Hobbit as well. I'm going to rename this to find book. Actually, so we obviously want to make sure that this works for every book and not just the first one. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get rid of my function, or at least I'm going to comment it out for now. And I want to do it in place here because it doesn't make sense for us to rename the function and create a whole new function just for any other book we want to find. We're going to use the shorthand for us to find the book here as a throwaway function right inside of the find function. So I'm just going to say here arrow function, and I'm going to say this is going to be the book parameter, and then the arrow, and in here I can just say, well, book, this is now my element. It's exactly the same code as here, just as an arrow function. Book.title should be The Hobbit, like that. And now when I look at my found book and I rerun this whole thing, we find The Hobbit. Perfect, so that works. And just beware, what comes back here is the object, right? The thing that we're looking for. Because when we move on now to filter, we're doing something slightly different. The logic, though, of the function here, of basically taking in a throwaway function, is exactly the same. So if I go and say const found books equals books.filter, what I'm doing is now taking on all the books where the condition here that we're going to pass in is true. So I can go, for example, just to start us off, I can take the same code that I wrote inside of my find function before, here inside of my filter function, and run this. And in this case here, my found books will still just have one element, which is The Hobbit, but it will be coming back in an array. Okay, so this way you're always expecting to find 0, 1 or more elements, but in the find function, you're always expecting one element or none at all. And actually on that as well, if I make a typo here on the found book and I go, it should be, you know, I have an extra T in here, and if I run this again, you'll see I get undefined back, right? So found book here will not be defined if the condition cannot be, or if no element can be found with that condition. On the other hand, here, filter is usually not something where we say, okay, is a title exactly equal to this, because we would expect one element to get back. What we would do here is more something around, you know, for example, filtering for the year published or for the genre. So if I want to get just the novels back, I can go, I want to have all the books where the where the genre equals a novel, like this. And now, what do we expect to get back? Well, we expect to get back Pride and Prejudice, we get Moby Dick, War and Peace. If we run this, we still get the Hobbit back here from before, but after that we have the array with The Great Gatsby, To Kill a Mockingbird, and all of our other elements. Now this is still strict equality, but you can obviously put any kind of condition in here. I can say year published should be bigger than 2000, right? I just want to have books that have been published within the last 23 years. So if I do that and I comment out The Hobbit, because we've seen that now multiple times, and I run it, we get back all the elements that have been published after 2000. If you know the sort function, you can also now sort it through in a way that it goes from most recent to furthest away. But that is pretty much it. The only thing here that I still want to show you is that if I make a condition that returns no elements, so if I go, for example, and say I want to have all the books that have been published after the year 2100, what happens here is if I run this, I get back an array that is empty, which is different to what we saw before if I have a wrong condition here, or not a wrong condition, but one that doesn't return anything, where I got undefined. What's the difference between them? Well, or what's the problem with just always using the filter function? Well, if you are working on a backend, for example, and you want to say, if I find the element, then I'm going to send back a response to the client. Then we would have something where we go and say, if found books, for example, we're going to return something to the front end, right? In this case here, we're just going to log out found books 0, or we're going to say found books 0 title, something like that, right? Now, if I do that, we're actually going to enter into this if block right here, and we're going to have an error because found books here, an empty array in JavaScript is considered a truthy value, right? So if I say if found books, and even if my array is empty, that will then say, okay, there is something there. Now, if I go and say length, that is not going to run anymore, which is perfect, right? So you can use length, but the best option is obviously if you want to have just one element returning, what you should do is you use the find function. You go if found book, and then we're just going to log out our found book.title just like this, right? And then if I have my condition wrong, so if I have here the Hobbit typed in incorrectly, I get nothing from that. On the other hand, when I then do it correctly, my if condition works exactly as expected, and we get back the Hobbit. Okay, so if you want to have one element, use the find function. If you want to have 0, 1 or more elements, use the filter function. That's it. Otherwise, the functions work exactly the same way.